frozen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Bill Davis, and hopefully you are seeing me. I'm not sure where I'm looking for myself, but welcome to the very first Office Hours Global Special Show interview. We're talking loudspeakers tonight. When you think about loudspeakers, what comes to mind first? Well, terms like transparent, tight, low end, maybe accuracy. How about the less than exciting terms? Big, heavy, unwieldy. We've all been there, particularly if you're doing an installation and you have some large audience, you want to cover, things can get very heavy and very unwieldy. And that's sometimes a part of reproducing audio for commercial use in commercial spaces. One traditional approach to loudspeaker design is big cabinets, heavy magnets, and difficulty locating them where you want to get great coverage. And that's why some audio pros have long been fascinated with thinner, lighter speaker systems, hopefully without compromising performance. And with that, I am delighted to welcome our special guest today, Marty Atias, a face very familiar to our Office Hours audience as one of the longtime experts from our Wednesday Focus on Audio shows. Marty owns ATS Communications and has spent decades in audio production, engineering, systems design, and integration. He's also the Mid-Atlantic channel manager for flat panel audio, something new we're going to be hearing about tonight. And as such, the perfect person to tell us about our topic today, modern flat panel speaker technology. Marty, welcome.
Hey, thank you, Bill. Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here to kick off this new Office Hours series. It's really been an honor to be asked to do this.
We're really excited to have you.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you.
When we heard about the fact that there was something new coming down the road, I think all of us were really interested. I know some of us have seen some of the ancient solutions in flat panels. I remember Magnapan and some other names from the days when I was a stereo head. But I think these sound to be very difficult. Can you tell me, let's start out with that. How are these different from typical loudspeaker systems?
Well, I'm glad you asked. That's a very good question. Can we take a look at, because we have a range of people here with a range of knowledge about, how sound is produced and what loudspeakers do, and how do you choose one for a room? So first thing I want to do is just do a quick review. So, professional loudspeakers have a woofer and then a compression driver behind a horn that produces mid and high frequencies, and the woofer produces low and mid frequencies. And you can see that they are in often different chambers, and they can get really complicated because sometimes you can get multi-component loudspeakers. So this, you can have as many drivers in these things as you want, and they get pretty complicated. One of the reasons they get so complicated is because from the lows to the mids, from the mids to the highs, there's a range of frequencies where multiple speakers are producing the same sounds, and they all need to be in phase with each other. So which is a timing thing. You see that if we go back to this first picture, you can see that the compression driver, which is back here, is way behind where the woofer driver is, which is right over here. And so one of those needs to be delayed slightly. And in the electronic crossover, the electronic circuit that separates the frequencies, there's still a certain range of frequencies that are common to both. And if they're not in phase, if they're not timed properly, you're going to get a lot of phase cancellations and a lot of issues. So a lot of engineering has gone into traditional loudspeakers to make these things sound good, be in phase, and have a correlated beam of sound that comes out of them in a very particular shape and pattern of the horn. So when you look at a loudspeaker specifications, you might see a specification that says dispersion pattern, 90 degrees wide by 60 degrees high. And that's the pattern that the horn is putting out. And that determines the coverage angle or area of the audience that speaker is going to cover. And so, and then you get into line arrays. But before we do that, the directionality of these speakers is such that low frequencies, because of the wavelengths, tend to be omnidirectional from any speaker. And as the frequencies get higher, the directionality gets narrower and narrower. And if we take a look at this kind of a graph, you can see that the green shape is very broad, and those are the lower frequencies. And as we get higher in frequencies, and this is what's coming out of a loudspeaker, the pattern gets narrower and narrower. And this is one of the challenges with traditional loudspeakers. Okay.
We know that from the fact that every time somebody drives by with a really killer car stereo, everybody in the mile around you hears it.
That's right. And all you're hearing is the bass, because the bass is very omnidirectional. It's coming out of the sides of the car, but the high frequencies are contained within the car. So, you know, and then we get into things like line arrays, where they will take these loudspeakers and hang them in a vertical line, which we call an array, and they will, each one of them has their own amplifier and their own processor. And the idea is that the vertical dispersion angle out of each of those boxes is only covering a thin slice of the audience, like 2 rows.
And that's what we see in most modern concerts that I've seen, is those line arrays hung, usually a couple of them on the 2 sides of the stage.
Right. And that's why there are so many of them, depending on the depth of the audience and whether there's a balcony. You might want to have multiple hangs of loudspeakers, one for the lower audience and one for the. So this gets all very complicated, and there's actually, you know, some very sophisticated software out there that you can use to try and predict based on a particular model loudspeaker and the dimensions of the room. You can try and predict what the behavior is going to be, what the coverage is going to be, what the volume at each area of the audience is going to be, and the frequency response. It gets very complicated. People have come to expect it and to use it, so it's very common to do this. Now, however, what's coming out of these speakers is correlated sound waves. And what do I mean by that? Well, when 2 things have a correlation between them, it means you can draw a direct relationship between them, right? So 2 data points, 2 pieces of information, if they're correlated, if there's a correlation that can be drawn from one to the other, then there's that relationship. And so in terms of acoustics, that would be the directionality of each of the frequencies that come out of the box, and the phase relationship of each of the frequencies, and the reflections off of the walls and the floors and the ceilings. They're all directly related to each other and to the direct sound from the loudspeaker. And reflections are always a very difficult thing to deal with, because you have, I got a good one for that one here. You always hear the direct sound from the loudspeaker first, because it's the most direct path. And as sound goes out to the sides and reflects off of a wall or a ceiling, that's a longer path to the boundary and then to you than the direct sound is. And that means that the reflected sound takes longer to get to you. And when that combines with the direct sound from the loudspeaker, there's a timing difference. The timing difference causes phase cancellations. And that really messes up sound. It messes up articulation. It messes up intelligibility of speech in particular, right?
Oh, and that's critical, because people want to hear what's being said. And these things sometimes are so short, it's measured in milliseconds, right? And so it's just harder to hear the articulation of speech when things are out of phase. Am I getting that right?
That's exactly right. When things are out of phase, you get those phase cancellations can cause all kinds of problems with the cancellation of certain frequencies and the boosting of other frequencies. depending on whether, the phase is out of the time it makes the direct and reflected sound, whether they're exactly opposite phase or if they're in phase, they will boost or cut each other.
In my voiceover work, I've actually heard somebody sum to mono and the voice disappear entirely because it was being fed to itself 180 degrees out of phase, and it just disappeared. It was kind of creepy.
Right, right. And in certain environments, voice intelligibility, speech intelligibility is the utmost importance, like at house of worship, for example, or a meeting hall, something like that. It's also worth noting that because of all of these reflections, that in a large room, there are generally three zones of acoustics. There's the direct zone, which is close to the loudspeaker, where you are hearing only the sound from the loudspeakers, and the reflected sound is behind you, and the reverberation of the room is way behind you at a much lower level. And so you're hearing only the direct sound from the speakers. A little bit beyond that, we have the transition zone. The transition zone, in fact, let me see if I can draw this out for you. I'm going to get to here and yeah, okay. So here. All right, so we have a room and we have loudspeakers. And right around in here, anywhere in here, this is the direct zone. You're so close to the loudspeakers, that's the only thing you're hearing. You're not hearing the room. And
those are
here,
good seats at a concert. You're right up front.
Those are, well, not necessarily. And I'll tell you why. You'll understand why. So from each of these speakers, there are reflections, right? And there are early reflections, which are reflections that happen, close to the loudspeaker. And then there are late reflections. And, as we get all of these reflections in here, we have a lot of reflections back here. This is called, the transition zone because you're hearing a little bit of the room. You're hearing the early reflections, which actually help to reinforce the sound of the speakers and gives you a sense of space, right? So that's in here. But back here, this is the reverberation zone. This is where all of the sound builds up, all of the reflections build up. And actually, this line right here is called the critical distance. Critical distance is, so when you're moving back from loudspeakers, the volume level is going to reduce. In fact, depending on the kind of loudspeaker, if you measure the volume at a close distance and then you double that distance, the sound pressure level is cut in half with the doubling of distance. You double that distance, it's cut in half again, right? So as you move away from speakers, the sound level gets reduced. At the critical distance, as you go beyond the critical distance, you will no longer experience a reduction in sound from the direct loudspeakers. In fact, you won't hear the direct loudspeakers at all because the volume of the reverberation is now what you're hearing. And so it's all reverberant field and you're not hearing anything from the loudspeakers. So the critical distance is really important. And in places like churches, cathedrals, that critical distance can be very close to the speakers because it's very reverberant. And that's why it's so hard to understand speech in a cathedral like that.
You've beautifully outlined the problem. Do these flat panel arrays make a giant difference in this problem?
Yeah, so let me show you what a flat panel is, okay? So this is the DML 500, which is known as a distributed mode loudspeaker. And I'll explain what that is in a moment, but you can see how thin it is, right? And I'm going to spin this around. This one has a cutaway so that you can see the panel here on the right. And this panel actually, so instead of a woofer and a tweeter or a compression driver, this panel actually vibrates.
So the whole surface is essentially the diaphragm of the speaker?
That's right. The whole surface is the diaphragm of the speaker. There's no crossover in this at all. It's just a single full range driver down to about 90 hertz.
So pretty low end there.
Pretty low, well, yeah, kind of low end. We do use subwoofers for music application, but for speech applications alone and for, just background music, they are fabulous, right? So that's what a flat panel speaker looks like. And just to illustrate about this vibration, we're going to go to here. So this is an image of what a flat panel looks like when it's vibrating. It's actually resonating, right? So behind the panel, there are 4 motors. There are 4 exciters. And when they're charged with electrical audio energy, they vibrate, right? And so that's what they drive almost like it's a magnet with a coil, but instead of having a diaphragm like a woofer or a compression driver, they're attached to the back of this panel, and the panel resonates with the sound frequencies. So what you're looking at is the resonance of 2000 hertz, just a pure tone.
And that's what 2000 hertz looks like on a flat panel?
That's what 2000 hertz looks like on a flat panel speaker as it resonates. Wow. The red are the high spots, the blue are the low spots. So, every frequency has a wavelength. The wavelengths go positive, they go negative, and so that's what you're seeing here. These are radiating out from each of the exciters and then reflecting off of the edges of the panel and then coming back.
That's fascinating. So it's like having a whole bunch of little speakers, I would imagine, depending on the frequency it's trying to reproduce.
Right. It's
wow,
like having a whole bunch of little speakers. That's
why
exactly
I love diagrams. You get to see things and how they work.
So what happens here is that this produces entirely uncorrelated sound waves. So the sound that comes out of this does not have a dispersion pattern that's like 60 by 90 or 40 by 120 or 10 degrees high by 120 degrees wide. Doesn't have that at all. It's 165 degrees in all directions.
Wow, so one speaker does essentially, not at the volume level, but essentially what the entire line array does for reaching all of that area. Is that what I'm kind of hearing?
That's exactly right. Imagine having one loudspeaker that can cover the entire floor and the entire balcony.
Interesting.
Right? All from one driver with no crossovers and no phase cancellations, full frequency response, even coverage, low drop off. So the drop off from a point source loudspeaker as you double in distance is 6 dB per doubling of distance. With a line array, because they are so directional, and the drop off is like 3 dB per doubling of distance. The drop off from flat panel speakers is like 4 dB from every doubling of distance. So it covers a lot of space, it covers a lot of depth. Now the uncorrelated nature of these means that 165 degrees, you think, well, that's going to reflect off of the walls, right? But they are uncorrelated in phase and in direction, which mean, and in frequency. So each frequency is sent out in a different direction. It's random. It's randomized, right? So where you can hear with a regular loudspeaker, you can hear from a reflection, you can hear pretty much everything in the audio. With a flat panel speaker, if you hear any reflection at all, it's like one frequency. It's not the whole thing. And so because it's so phase uncorrelated, when reflections combine with direct sound, they don't cancel in phase. This speaker is incapable of producing phase cancellations from reflections. In fact, they actually add to the sound power, to the total sound power that the audience experiences. So reflections are actually beneficial.
Wow, that's kind of a mind-blowing concept. That's
Isn't
something I
it?
hadn't considered before.
And in addition, because of that, two other things are really beneficial that happen. You can get the equivalent perceived volume level that you would get from a point source or a line array, but actually measure lower in sound pressure level. So your ears are not hearing the pressure that you would get from a line array, but it sounds like the same volume. So it's actually safer to listen to. And because all of the reflections are not building up in the room, the reverberation field in the back of the room is smaller, and the critical distance is pushed back.
This has caused me to have a couple of questions myself, and I know the panel wants to get in on some of these too. But so talk to me about power and signal requirements. How do these get fed? What kind of power do they require to operate? Efficiency, non-efficiency? What are some of the technical specs for these?
Oh, good example. Good question. So they are 8-ohm speakers. You drive them from a single channel of an amplifier, right? You want to cross them over at about 90 hertz, high pass filter at about 90 hertz. And from there down, if you need lower frequencies, you go to a subwoofer. Flat panel audio has some really, really good subwoofers that go with them, but you can use any subwoofer you want. And they are pretty efficient. And because, although some people have looked at the specs and say they don't look very efficient because they only have so many dBs per 1 watt input. But as I said, you get higher perceived sound level out of these with lower SPLs. So they are more efficient than they look like in the specs. But when you have a large area that you need to cover, you can array these just like you would do a line array. You can hang them. There's 3 panels in an array. But some of the really cool differences between these and line array boxes is they're 165 degrees in the vertical, and so and they're all uncorrelated. So with a line array box, this, in order to achieve this kind of image, each of those boxes, the angle from one box, from the angle between a box, the box above it, the box below it, has to be very, very precise so that they don't overlap. And you can see that, from red to blue to green, those beams don't overlap. If they did overlap, you would get phase cancellations. So in order to get this, the angle between the boxes is very precise, it's very calculated, and each box has its own volume control, so that the top box, because it's throwing farther, gets more amplifier power than the lower boxes that are serving the first row, so that everybody gets more of an even coverage, right? So that's what you got to do with a line array. But with flat panels, you don't need to do that. You don't need to worry about direction. You don't need to worry about the splay angle, which is the angle, the vertical angle from one box to another. Don't need to worry about any of that. In fact, you can array these vertically, like I'm showing here. You can array them horizontally, like next to each other. Don't make a difference. You can array them. You can have them play in the vertical orientation. So here's a picture in use where I had them at an outdoor concert with 2 subwoofers, underneath it. And this is in the landscape orientation. So it's horizontal, but you can have them in a vertical as well. You can just turn them sideways and don't make a difference. So
So
it's
all the
purely an
actual
aesthetic.
coverage for people listening to this is the rectangle on top. Those two cabinets below are purely for low end support, and that's the only speaker you need out there.
That's right. That's right.
Boy, that's just a whole lot better than hand trucking out big cabinet packages for the traditional coverage of a medium to large crowd. I know some other people in the panel here want to ask some questions. Is there anything else you want to hit
Well,
in
let's go
terms
with
of
the
their
questions.
unique? Okay,
Sure, we'll get to a lot
CJ,
more.
Hey,
CJ
Marty.
Cavell.
So you've blown my mind a little bit here thinking about this technology, and it seems almost like these speakers are defying the inverse square law with having, a single panel be able to not have that decay of, 6 dB every time you're doubling the distance. So is that because it's not coming from a single point anymore? It's like it's almost a wider point. Is it making like how are you able so essentially you're able to achieve almost the same sort of fall off as a traditional line array, but with a single unit.
That's right. That's right. Because of the effects of the uncorrelated sound that's coming out of the speakers, and they throw very intelligible and clear audio a lot farther than a typical point source speaker does. It's just the nature of the beast. It's a different take on
So
acoustic physics.
when you throw those in an array, and if it's throwing so wide, I mean, is there a lot at the overlap between two of those speakers? Is there a perceived increase in levels? Because let me tell you, I've been to hundreds of concerts, and I was lucky enough to care about my ears when I first started going that I wore earplugs to all of them. And I would love to had done that because the sound pressure level was something a little bit more safe. So what does the overlap look like when you're in an array like that?
So when you array these flat panel speakers, it simply increases the volume by about 3 dB per panel, and it warms up the bottom end a little bit.
So there's no like zone where two of the speakers are overlapping and just that zone is increased. The whole sound field is increased by, wow,
That's it.
that's
That's
incredible.
correct. And, it's interesting that you mentioned the ear fatigue that you can get at a concert. And if you think about, we'll go back to to what a loudspeaker looks like. A traditional loudspeaker. This this compression driver in here. It's called a compression driver for a reason.
Compressing a lot of air and sending out that horn.
It is. It's a very thin, a dome-shaped driver inside of that thing. I wish I had a blow up of what it looks like, and it's in a chamber with a very small exit, and it as that diaphragm is moving, and it's moving really fast because these are the higher frequencies. They're very short wavelengths. It's moving a lot, right, and really quickly, and the air pressure in that driver like builds up to this very small. You can see the back of the throat of the horn in a very high pressure, and then it's forced out the horn, and the horn acts like the lens of a stage light, right, to shape the dispersion of the sound wave like you can shape light, right? So it's really pumping out high pressure air, and that causes ear fatigue.
Well, and that 4K or 6K signal's coming out of that little thing and just blasting at you. In the flat panels, it seems like that's coming out of the whole surface. And so it's no longer that compressed bullet. It's more a wider zone of sound production.
Some of the comments that we get from audience members and people who listen to these things say it sounds so pleasing and so non-fatiguing. It sounds open and almost transparent.
That's a good word in audio. CJ has another question, and we're going to go to our producer questions, our audience. So,
Yeah,
CJ?
The two quick ones that I wanted to sneak in here, because like I said, you're kind of like you've just unlocked a whole new section of my brain, and I'm trying to like deal with the laws of physics or recope with them here. Number one, what is in terms of power and weight to versus a traditional line array? What would you say the power and weight requirements are to produce the same level of perceived volume for an audience when you go from a line array to a flat panel?
Hmm. So the panel weighs 44 pounds before you put mounting hardware on it. So 44 pounds, a bit hefty, but a line array box weighs that much or more, right? Um, the power can be, it's fairly efficient. You can run this on a 400 watt amplifier. But if you're going to use it for music, if you're going to use it for concerts, if you're going to use it in large spaces, the amplifier that Flat Panel Audio has selected to go with it, and with the one they recommend, is the Leah 1504, which is 1500 watts per channel. And yes, you can drive this with a 1500 watt amplifier, right? And that amplifier has digital signal processing in it, including limiters and equalizers and stuff like that, and compressors. So it protects the speaker from blowing up, but it gets loud. Let me tell you, I've had these playing a concert on a golf course. I guess a couple of 100 feet back, you can still hear it.
So my very last question then is, how does it sound?
Oh, it sounds amazing. People
what is the feeling like? Like, what's the experience?
Well, it depends on the room. It's most, if you play this in a acoustically behaved room, right? It's going to sound great. It's going to sound transparent. It's going to sound very smooth. The high end goes well above 20 kilohertz, and it just sounds silky smooth, no distortion whatsoever. If you put these in a poorly behaved acoustic room, it's going to blow your mind, because any other loudspeaker is just going to sound like a wash and reverb, and intelligibility is going to be really poor, and it's going to be really hard to understand things. You put these in that same room, and it's like night and day.
Harshid Trivedi has a quick question before we get to our producers.
Yes. What I was wondering is that with the cost of the average PA system and your system, for someone that's new in this game of trying to set up either a house of worship or maybe a vehicle for a parade, could this actually work out for them?
Absolutely. In fact, on our website, you will be able to find a cost comparison between various line array systems and an equivalent flat panel system. And what we found is that per seat in various size venues, flat panels are much less expensive than a line array system.
All right, let's get to our producer questions. Cindy, what have we got?
Our first one is from Florence Donald in Maryland. What are the core use cases for flat panel speakers?
There's so many of them. We've had these outdoors on football fields and on golf courses. We've had them indoors in concerts. We've had them in tons and tons of churches where no other speaker system ever sounded this good. So many of our customers, so we go out and we do demos. So we have channel managers like myself spread out around the country. And the way we get most of our sales is to bring out a set of speakers and set them up in your venue and do a demo and let you hear them for yourself. Because, I get a lot of comments like, you're claiming to defy the laws of acoustical physics, and it's no, we're just applying them differently. We're applying a different set of acoustical physics than other loudspeakers are limited to. This system is not limited like they are to a certain set of acoustical physics. So The most convincing thing is to go out and do a demo in your venue and let you hear it for yourself.
Let's switch to our next question.
Dave Troutman in Edmonton asks, how are these different from electrostatic speaker systems?
Yeah, okay, I hear that a lot too. Electrostatic speakers are kind of like the inverse of a condenser microphone. An electrostatic speaker has a charged plate that the audio gets applied to. So it acts like a condenser, like a capacitor. So the charge plate changes its charge according to the audio modulation, and that sits between two charged plates. And so as the electrical field changes on the center plate, it creates electrostatic changes that produce sound from these speakers. So it's a completely different technology. Electrostatic speakers are really high-end hi-fi home speakers, and they can sound amazing, but they cannot handle the power or produce the volume that is needed for professional applications.
CJ, you wanted to weigh in on this with a
Because
secondary?
I've seen systems like this from Martin and Logan and others who have these electrostatic type systems, and the thought always is the nature in which these are making sounds, and I don't know how you produce a stereo image out of something like that if it's not quite as directional. Like how would I design either a pure stereo hi-fi or some sort of surround with something like that? So the thought came to mind is, I guess, to follow up, is there any way that you could use something like this in a stereo application, or would would the image get muddied?
Stereo applications, there's a very curious thing about stereo applications. Whenever you set up speakers in stereo, whether it be home or in a church or in a venue, there's always a sweet spot, right? In between, you want to be equidistant to both of the speakers, so in dead center, right? And if you go off a little bit, it'll change. So, and you want to be a certain distance from the speakers. So there's a sweet spot. It's like an oval. And this applies to, any conventional speaker in any room. There's always an optimum seating location called the sweet spot. Even in recording studio control rooms, where the engineer sits, that's the sweet spot. Where the producers sit behind, it's slightly out of the sweet spot. And that's because the engineer needs to hear the best sound possible. And the reason for that is because of the correlated sound waves, because of the timing. The timing is critical, right? So what happens if you go off center, and now you are closer to one loudspeaker than you are to the other one, and so there's a time delay, there's a time difference, time of arrival difference. You'll hear the closest speaker first, and the farther speaker a little bit later, and that's where we get into that phase cancellation again, right? So that's why you don't generally see stereo systems set up in venues, because the audience is all over the place. You've got two hangs up front, and not everybody can be in the sweet spot. Well, with flat panel speakers, with uncorrelated sound, with 165 degrees of dispersion pattern, the entire room is the sweet spot. You can do stereo imaging everywhere in the room.
It made sense to me because I was thinking about it, right? You've got left and right sources that are different. So the kick's on the left, the violin's on the right, whatever. They're going to both still be there. If you have two speakers hanging on two sides of the stage, they're just going to be both reaching everybody. So it's the difference in the signals fed to left and right that forms the stereo image, not so much the placement or what's being produced by the speaker. So it finally clicked for me. I was in the same place you were, CJ.
Yeah,
yeah.
But with conventional speakers, they have a particular horizontal dispersion as well, right? And so You know, in a large room, especially in a wide room, right? Generally, what happens is each of those speaker hangs, each of those arrays is covering, you know, the audience area that is in front of it. And so if you have an aisle down the center, the left hang is covering the left side, the right hang is covering the right side, and they're very physically adjusted so that they don't overlap. You know, the center aisle is deadly in between, but they should be out of the coverage. So you're not hearing the timing difference and more importantly, the phase difference between the two hangs at any seat. But with flat panels, there is no phase cancellation. And so you can do stereo imaging, and it doesn't matter if you're closer to one or the other. Yes, there will be a slight timing difference, but not anything that you're going to notice, right? And it's not going to cause any phase cancellation. So we do stereo imaging and the entire room gets that image.
Let's go to our next question.
Here's one from Jeff Keithley in Texas. Can you get the same kind of sound pressure out of this setup versus traditional speaker setups with cones and drivers?
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. In fact, you can get the same perceived loudness with a lower sound pressure level.
So, you know, you get into a concert and they're about 110, 120 decibels sometimes. It drives those of us who value our hearing crazy. You're saying essentially you can get less SPL out there, but have a perceived, not louder so much as clearer and better sound experience at the audience. Is that kind of where you're headed?
Yeah, when we go out and do demos, you know, in locations that like have installed speaker systems already, what we'll do is we'll play some pink noise or music or tone or speech or whatever individually to each pair of speakers, and we'll adjust them so that they sound the same level, and then measure the SPLs, and the flat panels will measure lower.
Interesting. Let's go to our next question.
Rian Smith is asking, in which application, home use, vehicles, party loudspeakers, etc., does the cost of these become prohibitive compared to regular speakers?
Okay. They become more, well, of course, you know, affordability is a relative concept, right? But, you know, they are not inexpensive speakers. They are in line with the highest grade professional speakers, although, no, I'm going to take that back, with midline professional speakers, because I'll tell you, they run around $4,000 a piece, right?
So not something a church, a reasonable congregation in a church would be look askance
You'd
at.
be surprised. You'd be surprised, because particularly in a church, what is more mission critical than speech intelligibility, right?
Yeah.
And in most churches, the architectural aesthetic is comes in at primary importance in the mind of the architect.
Yeah, they tend to be pretty over sound great. I've seen that in more houses of worship than I care to admit.
So these are very, very, very popular in churches.
There is some directionality. I know you said it's a pretty big spread, but churches tend to be high, right? They build these huge vaulted ceilings in a lot of houses of worship. And so that doesn't really mess with these too much. That's my kind of thought process.
Yeah, absolutely. Because they throw farther, because they don't excite the room in a way that emphasizes reverberation. These can be up high. In fact, there are, you know, we have demo videos on our website, on our YouTube page. There are actually two websites. There's my website version, and then there's the company's website version. We have slightly different information up there, and it's all useful, and it's all you know, in concert with each other. I have some demo videos that you can find on my website. And we have speakers that are up high, speakers that are down low, speakers that are spread out in stereo, and some that are just in mono, and they just sound good.
And I think I blew the next question because I got a little ahead of things. I wasn't paying attention to it, but go ahead. Go ahead, Cindy.
The next question's from Tony Mobley in Noonan. Is there a house of worship use case for flat panel speakers, or are they overkill for house of worship?
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
we
that,
have so many churches that are using flat panel speakers. We have churches, the typical response that we get when we go out to do a demo or an install at a church, particularly difficult churches, the typical response is, I've never heard this room sound so good. I've never been able to understand speech quite so well.
let's go to the next question.
Lalak Lopez Waterman in Roanoke, Virginia. Do they use any of these panel speakers at the Sphere in Vegas?
No, they don't.
Their speaker array is pretty amazing from what I've seen. They have a gazillion speakers mounted in that place, and probably not these. Let's go to the next question.
And from Douglas Carmichael, how does this relate to technologies like HOLOPLOT?
HOLOPLOT is the technology that is used at the Sphere. And so what they are doing is they have many, many, many loudspeakers distributed along, the interior of the sphere, so that everybody is like close to some of them, and they're all very directional, so that they can actually target particular sounds to particular seats. That's how directional each one of those is. So in reverberant spaces like this, one of the traditional means to overcome reverberation in a space and pierce the critical distance barrier is to make the speaker more directional, right? So make it like a spotlight instead of a floodlight. And when you're doing that, by making it more directional, you're actually reducing the reflections off of the wall boundaries. And so you're not exciting the room the same way. But, there are inherent difficulties in doing that, because the more directional you make the loudspeaker, the harsher it's going to sound, the fewer seats it's going to cover. You may need more of them. So that gets, more difficult.
Let's go to our next question.
Angelo Jack in Brooklyn is asking, which manufacturers are currently making these types of speaker, and what, if any, special equipment is needed?
There is only one, and it is a patented technology. Flat Panel Audio is the name of the company. It's in California. These speakers are actually manufactured in the United States by hand, every single one of them. And and special equipment needed? None. The rigging hardware comes from Flat Panel. It's all very available. It's not terribly expensive. They can be hung by anybody who is qualified to hang loudspeakers. Amplifiers, you can use many different kinds of amplifiers, though we certainly do have our recommendations. And it's very easy to implement.
Let's go to our next question.
From Kenny Hampron in Greenville, Illinois, are these panels prone to produce or reject feedback differently than conventional speakers?
Yes. They are very resistant to feedback. In fact, I have done demos where I've had a wireless microphone that I'm talking into, and I will walk right up to that speaker, put the microphone in front of the speaker, and it will not feedback. Now, that's not to say that I can't make it feedback. I have made it feedback. In certain rooms, there was one particular room, this was a church, lots of hard surfaces, and we knew from experience that the configuration of this room was such that all of the reflections from the point source loudspeakers, all of the reflections were aimed right back at the pulpit. And so that microphone was like in the Fresnel zone, and it just was horrible. But with flat panel speakers, with uncorrelated sound waves, we could get a lot more gain before feedback out of them, and the voice clarity was way higher, and it was a much more enveloping sound.
Let's go to the next question.
This one is for me. This speaker technology sounds so great. What's the downside? Why wouldn't they replace every traditional speaker out there?
I'm glad you asked.
You'd love that.
Well, as we do more demos, as we expose more people to the technology, as more people become convinced and believers, we are actually replacing a lot of installs out there. When it comes to musical acts and concerts and concert venues, one of the challenges we have is that because so few people know about them, a touring band will present the venue with a contract with part of the contract that's known as a rider. And the rider will specify what equipment the venue needs to provide for that band to perform. And they often specify certain kinds of loudspeaker systems. Sometimes they'll be as specific as a make and model, right? Sometimes just a type, like we want to have a line array with six boxes per side, something like that, which is oftentimes unrealistic because you can't specify the same loudspeaker for every room, right? But you won't find flat panels on any rider, not yet anyway. We have, there are some world-class acoustic guitarists, right, from Peru and Paraguay and from Australia and from Spain, who have been touring around the smaller venues and have played through these, and man, they love it. The sound of an acoustic guitar through these things, it will just blow you away. It just sounds so natural. It sounds like that instrument.
Let's go to our last question.
From Andre Dole in Berlin, how come that you found the secret recipe? Any physical breakthrough discoveries recently?
Well, actually, distributed mode loudspeakers have been around for a long time. You can find YouTube videos and AES, Audio Engineering Society documents and other journal documents describing distributed mode loudspeakers and their behavior and their construction. And a lot of people have tested them, mostly in the home environment. Some of them have tested them in a laboratory environment. This is the first time and the first particular design that is usable in a professional application. Prior applications, so the original patent holder was a company called NXT, and they were marketing these kinds of speakers that could turn any hard surface into a loudspeaker, like a table or a window or a picture frame or your computer monitor or something like that. And they were single exciters instead of 4 like we're using, and very limited power and very limited application. So the company that bought that patent was called Tectonic Audio, and they were the company that developed this DML 500 and a couple of other versions of it. And they were the company that were able to design a system that is actually loud enough and clear enough and with a wide enough frequency response that handles enough power to be used in a professional application. And so the assets, the technology, the product is now owned by people who used to work for Tectonic and renamed the company Flat Panel Audio, and that's what we have to show today. Now, there is one interesting aspect of these speakers that I hadn't mentioned yet, and Cindy, your question, it will go to your question. These speakers are actually sort of dipoles or bipoles. And what I mean by that is their sound comes out of the back of the speaker as well as the front. It's at a reduced level and a damped high frequencies, but sound does come out of the back of the speaker. Now, because it's so uncorrelated, it generally helps to reinforce the sound coming out of the front. And again, the reflections do not cause phase cancellations. So we put them in front of like a wall or a corner, and it just serves to further improve the sound quality of the product. And even if you were to put them in the front of a stage, sound coming out of the back just means that the band members will hear more from the front speakers in a non-destructive way.
Very cool technology. Thank you for coming in and sharing all of that with us. That's going to wrap up our first office hours special show presentation. Before we do that, hey, if people want to reach out to you, Marty, what's the contact people should use to get more information about the product?
All right, so the one website is, this is going to be long, ATSComms, ATSCOMMS, FPA for flat panel audio, .site, site. And if that's too complicated, no problem, go to flatpanelaudio.com. And that's the company. So I'm the East Coast channel manager, and we have channel managers all over the country. Reach out to Flat Panel and we can connect you if you're interested, you want to get more information, you want to get a demo, just let us know.
And also, don't forget, Wednesday is typically audio day at officehours.global at the main show in the morning. And Marty is a frequent panelist there, so you can always get a hold of him by just joining the show there. Don't forget, Office Hours Global, live every day, 7 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. You can watch or subscribe on YouTube for our daily technology panel Q&A discussions. For more information about that, go to officehours.global/join, and that'll kind of set you on the path to getting more information about that. There's some special crew here we want to thank: Taylor and Peter and Robert and Jeff and Alan and Dave T. Those are just some of the people who are responsible in the back end today. Our shows that we've been doing now for almost 5 years, every single day without missing, rely on a large and extraordinarily talented village of people like those I just mentioned who are helping us with this particular shows. But there's a lot of people out there who are doing a lot of work, and we appreciate it. You can join us if you'd like, become a volunteer or something like that. It's really easy to do. But that's going to take care of our show for today. Thank you all for joining us at this very first Office Hours special. And we're going to wrap things up right now. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Hard to believe it's been 5 years. Oh my goodness.
I know, we're getting really
haven't
close.
missed